I am making somewhat steady progress. The largest change since... oh boy, it's going to be fun. Sup nerds, welcome back. We're going to be talking about three main things today. I know it's been a while since I have had a real update for you, but firstly, we're going to talk about the overall changes to the game that we've made, which is the largest change since... oh boy. Since we separated battlefield movements between party mode and competitive. Then we're going to talk specifically about the impacts of that and a change to nifu on Shogi, Japanese chess, which, for people who are a little bit lost, don't worry, I will briefly cover how that game works. The last thing we're going to cover is the most recent things going on with the website for actually being able to play this game and other crazy games like it, which all of you will be able to make. It's going to be fun. First things first. The balance changes we made to Twin Suns and a short list of the pieces which have dead file rules. Twin Suns. Oh, Embers do not have dead file rules. Would you look at that? I'm assuming I definitely got that right in the document because I checked everything. Okay. However, because Embers no longer have battlefield rules, the machine gun system doesn't work like it used to because you can't go backwards like this. Since that was taken away, the conflagration can now move 2 spaces diagonally instead of just 1, and will immediately be able to get into the game much, much quicker and be a part of the attack, which is frankly terrifying, but battlefield moves were a big deal for Twin Suns. I think it's technically too much of a buff, but hard to say. We may have to reduce the range of the conflagration on the attack from... is it 2 or 3 right now? If it's 2, then that's ridiculous, but the conflagration ranges for attack and movement being changed are the main dial that will actually be changed for this battalion balance-wise. Pretty much everything else is set in stone, except maybe the conflagration losing the ability to capture friendly pieces, which was supposed to be how you developed it before, but it's a little bit of a legacy rule, hard to say. We'll keep it or remove it based on balance because it's fine game feel-wise. Cool. Next battalion. Palace. No changes. Morning Calm, which these are supposed to be hexagonal because now I'm talking about Korean chess, but this app doesn't have different piece assets for that one. No changes. Spartans. As you can see, the hoplites don't get stuck. They do not have a dead file movement. Otherwise, no changes. Empire. Empire pawns have dead file movement. Golden Horde. As you can see, it is fairly trivial to keep them from getting trapped, even against Twin Suns where they wouldn't have access to this square. Horde Scouts do not have dead file movement. Crab is unchanged. Frost Beasts is unchanged. Frost Wolves in Frost Beasts do not have dead file movement. Largest change we made was previously, in order to solve this issue, where this Shogi pawn would get stuck, is we had a battlefield movement. So on this entire blue area, any piece that could get stuck was able to move sideways. The net result of that was more dynamic games. Pawn structures were fixable if you had the time. So you could give away tempo turns in order to fix pawn structure issues and vice versa, or come up with fancy pawn breaks in the chess mirror. So real quick, for example, here, this is a legal move. It's a gambit. It's something you technically would be allowed to do. And that, honestly, made for some really interesting games. But the issue is we had a concern when we first implemented the rules that this technically decreased king safety. And anytime you decrease king safety, white advantage goes up. And the reason for that is they get to capitalize on that lack of king safety first. So, hypothetical extreme, let's say you had a piece that could capture anywhere on the board, it could jump everywhere, it could just kill everything. It would be checkmate and zero. Because king safety is so low, even if you gave it to both sides. And then next hypothetical extreme, you give both sides like a super queen, like an Amazon piece, and the ability to blow up all of the enemy pawns as a turn. It just remove the pawns and put an Amazon out here. White gets to move first, white gets to put the enemy in check. Typically, unless there's some trick there, that should mean white is winning. Now, back to the other end of the extreme, chess, despite the possibility of a white advantage, is a draw at perfect play as far as we can tell. It's not... It's really, really complicated, impossible to compute tic-tac-toe. And you're just playing for those edge cases, which are large enough to make for an interesting game. So, we had to double check when we implemented that rule, whether or not pawn sideways would cause that. And the way we ended up affirming to ourselves that this wouldn't do it is actually the Vladimir Kramnik Alpha Zero paper, back before he was publicly known as someone who had gone insane, where they studied 10 different chess variants to figure out how they affected game balance and white advantage and all of that by having the AI compute through roughly, I think it was 11,000 total games after a self-training exercise for each game, 1,000 of which were at a longer time control and 10,000 of which were at a shorter time control, and I don't remember exactly what. But notably, one of the variants they tested was just normal pawn sideways. So pawns are always allowed to move sideways. And in that variant, the game was still... there was a slightly more white advantage than normal, but it wasn't massive, right? It was well within margin. Okay, so this is the first point about this. The problem with saying, okay, we only have pawn sideways on part of the board rather than the whole board. So our white advantage should be somewhere between normal chess, which is well within the acceptable range. In fact, it's very, like, you can change variables in chess a lot before you actually cause a white advantage problem. And pawn sideways, which is also in the acceptable range. But, notably, white gets there first. White gets to the battlefield first. And because white gets to the battlefield first and it's not available already, there is no passive ability for black to utilize it. Which means our assumption could be wrong. We don't know that it's wrong, but it could be wrong. And it's somewhat likely that there are some lines which you have to play pretty much perfectly as black, or you will just lose. To be more specific, the lines that were really looked at, let me go through it real quick, were actually flank attacks and specifically these two kingside attacks were the main ones that were looked at. Anything of this combination. And most of them resulted in the black kingside being completely blown open. Now that doesn't mean that they're winning. It just means that they're really tough to play. Okay. The second point is, now once that that assumption was called into question enough that we couldn't rely on it anymore, is there is technically a game feel issue, which is here. Let me go back. So normally, let's just do. So for example, let's right here assume you completely play out the normal isolated Queen's Pawn line of the Queen's Gambit declined, right? So real quick, that would be d4, d5, Queen's Gambit declined, the knights develop, you set up the fianchetto, you apply pressure, you take immediately there, the bishop goes onto the long diagonal, the knight joins, all of this becomes set up, both sides castle, takes, and we're here. The queen pawn does not have friends. But this is a well-explored line. It's very known how to defend it. All you have to do is study, right? But there are cases where this particular position would be worse for white than normal because you have access to this and then trading into an endgame. And furthermore, after a protected push like this, you could make a threat on the knight that continues to have tempi after the trade. So there's a lot of things here where this developed pawn is capable of effectively fixing the weakness for black. And because it's the only pawn that is on the battlefield, it's effectively soft promoted. Now, this has pros and cons for game feel, but the main potential con is it's fundamentally different from chess, where this pawn no longer gets to do what it is designed to do from this opening, which is be fucking stuck on its own and only able to go forward. Like, its best hope would be to trade for this not isolated pawn most of the time. Sometimes it becomes an advantage because it is a center pawn that covers two very critical squares, but for the most part it's a weakness that you have to defend. Gross oversimplification, but this sort of thing doesn't happen in a world with battlefield moves. And that's not the only case. So let's hypothetically say, let me go back to an open board and just say that we have an 8x8 in this section, because I don't want to go through too much effort. And we have pawns. Let's say we have a black pawn here, a white pawn here, here, and here, and then black pawns here, here, and here, or even here. Normally, even with a couple kings on the board, say here and here, you would be trying to trade these off. But in this situation, they can push this pawn over and then go down and become a pass pawn where it wasn't before. And it's not about trades, it's just the tempo of getting here and then here, or here and then here fast enough would be enough to fix, quote unquote, your issue and win the game. Okay. Naturally, white is first to have access to those. And in normal pawn sideways, you would be able to defend that by doing this sort of thing. But because it's that narrow band in the center, a pawn that isn't developed doesn't get to go sideways and therefore can't unisolate the pawn like it can in the variant that was tested. So you can undouble pawns, you can unisolate pawns, and you can pass pawns. And we just accepted this for 5 years because it was a different game, and it's okay that it's different. Now, let's talk about what the new rules are, because I'm sure all of you have opinions. The new rules say that... Here, let me go back to the start before we did all this. Okay. Rather than caring about the battlefield, we now care about what are called dead files, which are files which are incomplete and do not go from back rank to back rank. So this one and this one. Now, the pieces that do definitely get stuck, not the ones that can, only the ones that are guaranteed to get stuck in some board state, are allowed to sidestep. Okay? So the pawn, this pawn, can sidestep at any of these spots. And this pawn can sidestep on any of these spots. And effectively move in on that narrower band. So we still have the expanded opening theory of being able to position your boards, but you don't have that extra aggression. And this makes the game feel much more chess-like than before. It is chess with expanded opening theory rather than chess with romantic aggro pushes. In the mirror. Now, I don't think I would make this change if it was just about chess versus chess. No, the issue comes up that we have enough matchups here that sort of variance in the king safety, because we have 10 total battalions in the core game, including chess, shogi, shangqi, which is Chinese chess, Korean chess, twin suns, frost beasts, etc. Some combination of those armies against each other is going to run into king safety steamrolls because our assumptions were wrong. And I am fairly confident in that. And you can, there's a quote in the community, balance around it, just deal with it. Okay, this is best game feel, make it work. Which, fair enough, but I'm not super confident in that. And I think overall, just the fact that we are able to have chess versus shogi should be enough unique game feel. And making chess feel more chess-like in that matchup is a good thing. Even if the chess mirror suffers from being too boring like normal chess, which some of our community has asserted with this change. Okay. The only piece that gets applied that pawn sideways buff is the lance. We accepted, due to shogi rules about these two being illegal to stack in the same column, that the shogi pawn is not allowed to do that. Only the lance is a dead file mover. And the reason for that is, let's say we put shogi one more over. And let's see, what would be worst case? The twin suns matchup, because they're only 7 wide. The knight can get here without getting stuck from the starting position. You can get it stuck for sure, but it won't actually. The pawns don't have it because it's bad game feel for shogi. And they're the only piece that is guaranteed to get stuck that doesn't get the dead file movement. So the piece that is helped the most is actually the lance. And notably, if we go back to this position, that immediately puts it set up for lance attacks. And you have options before you do so. It's very hard to get it to here. But the point is, on any of those squares, you're able to get done what you want done, which is the lance can actually play the game. The lance did have battlefield movement in the old rules, but you would have to get this forward, get this captured, move this over, get this onto the battlefield, and then move that over in order to get the lance out, which is pretty much guaranteed not to happen. Even in scenarios where it could come up, it's much harder than now when you can just go here first. So something as simple as here, here, here is an option. Not a good option, but it is an option. Let's get everyone who doesn't know Shogi up to date. Lances move and capture forward. They, because of dead file rules on dead files, such as this one, can also move sideways towards the non-dead files. Okay, this is a bishop. Let me force westernize for a moment. That's a bishop. But the difference is it has a promotion inside the enemy territory, so back 3 ranks, where it also gains a king move and capture. This is a rook with the same promotion, where it gains a king move and capture after reaching enemy territory. That promotion is optional, moving into, between, or out of any enemy territory square, and that's mostly to prevent stalemates that you would do that sort of thing. I think there are cases where it comes up otherwise, but most of the time you promote it when you can promote it. These can move and capture 1 square forward. Move and capture 1 square forward, right? So different from normal chess pawns, which move forward and capture diagonal. Once they reach enemy territory, they promote to a gold general. In fact, everything I'm about to highlight has the ability to promote to a gold general. Let's unhighlight the gold general. All 4 of these, once they go to enemy territory. And some of them, if they would get stuck on the back rank or back 2 ranks, depending, are forced to promote on those squares. Let me flip the board real quick so this makes sense. A silver general is a bishop to 1 and also has all 3 forward squares. So this piece has this pattern to its move and capture. A gold general is a rook to 1 with the same rules. The king is a normal king. The knight only moves to the forward 2 squares, and that's all of the piece movements. Shogi also adds a rule to the game where any piece that gets captured, you... Here. Let me do a very basic... You put the piece on your side in your color, and then later you can redeploy it. Chess players know these rules as Crazy House, but it's Shogi drop rules. And they apply that rule in Titan's Battalion to the whole game. Alright. Now that we're up to date, thank you for bearing with me if you already knew all that, which most of you should, but just in case, I'm always going to cover the bases when it comes up. Learning kanji isn't too hard, but I fully understand if you prefer this, or I personally really like guide kanji, which looks like this. So you see that it has a diagram for the movement on the pieces themselves, which matches what I described earlier. This is Shogi Harbor. She's wonderful. She's Polish, and she's actually a professional shogi player. Please check her out. So the thing that we had to change for Shogi in particular was the nifu rules, and we did this in combination with the previous change. So, the nifu rules used to be just these shogi pawns couldn't be owned by the same player in the same column. So your opponent would gain a shogi pawn, and then they would be able to deploy it anywhere because they don't have other shogi pawns. And then you would get one of their pawns and be able to deploy it anywhere too, which is fair, right? Well, problem 1, it decreased king safety. So it made the game very aggressive very quickly and took away the time the shogi needs to build a castle and actually have the king safety they're supposed to. Second problem. When the chess player in this scenario redeploys the shogi pawn and it gets captured, shogi is now restricted where it goes. So if they get a shogi pawn back, they have to obey nifu to redeploy it. But if chess gets a chess pawn back, they don't have to obey nifu to redeploy it. So effectively, chess gets the better end of this deal, because the restriction only applies if you have a decent number of shogi pawns on the board. And that happens because you start with 9 as shogi, and it fills every column to start with. Okay, the new rules are any pawn class piece cannot be dropped into a column where you already have any pawn class piece. So the way we do this in chess, or in Titan's Battalion, is we just list every piece that counts, which is a little bit of a silly way to do it, but it's fine. And notably, if this pawn is on a dead file, it's fine to move it over. And notably, if you capture with it, it's fine to double pawns. It's only the drop from hand that counts. But it means that, for example, we go here, and this dies to this, and then this dies to this. White can no longer deploy this here if they wanted to for some reason. All of these files with pawns are completely illegal for the deployment. And the same goes for shogi. They cannot deploy this chess pawn anywhere out here either, which delays the king attack, the end game, a bit. Notably, I think that this was a very bad idea for white, and you should not do this. But I digress. So, it's hard to say whether or not this fixes Shogi's balance issues, because between these two changes, the nifu change and the battlefield rule change being replaced with dead file rules, king safety has gone up for both sides considerably. So shogi, in theory, should have more time than they used to defend themselves. And once they have more time to defend themselves, chess, if both sides play defensively, shogi has better king safety. Because chess, in order to defend themselves, would have to sacrifice a more powerful piece than these. And furthermore, these are capable of all sorts of interesting castles, which if you're a shogi player, you know what I'm talking about when it comes to castles. But chess has the advantage of being able to castle more quickly because of the thing called castling in chess, right? You spend like 4 or 5 moves building a fortress in shogi, and you feel fine because it's slow enough. You spend that time when the opponent is literally gearing up to rip your frickin' head off. It's a lot harder to actually get where you need to when you're constantly having to defend all of these pawns, right? These ones get away with it, but still. These 4 pawns are all weak at the start of the game, and something as simple as gold general here, right, to cover your bases, or silver here to get everything under control. And they can just push this pawn all the way to here, and you can't really take back without the queen getting in your face. It's a bit difficult. All right. This rook and this bishop off to the side, by the way, are called reinforcements. Shogi is able to deploy them at any time during the game within their territory as a turn. So, is shogi balanced? Definitely not. We haven't done nearly enough testing to be able to claim that, and statistically speaking, we're most likely off. And more than likely, I think shogi is still technically weak right now. Because if you just compare materially, these knights are better than these knights. You can argue the rooks are equal because this one's in the game faster and promotes. You can argue that the bishops are equal. And then the queen is what? Compensating for these generals? And then the lance is trying to pick up some slack too. So it's what? You're comparing these 8 pieces to these 3. And I will say that the chess pawns are... It's really debatable on which pawn line is stronger, because the Shogi promotion is 2 entire turns faster and really hard to deal with, because you capture a promoted piece, you get the same one back, and you capture a chess pawn and you're able to threaten promotion on the back rank immediately. But on the other hand, this covers 2 squares and this covers 1. Hard to say. I do think because Shogi, there's arguments that you can make about how many turns of tempo are worth how many pawns. And typically the argument is you need 2 turns of tempo to be equal to 1 pawn, 1 chess pawn. 2 or more turns of tempo. And you will gain a positional advantage to compensate for the material loss. For example, the Catalan, right? But in Shogi, that difference is greater. I would argue that a turn of tempo in Shogi, like true tempo, could be worth as much as 2 pawns. And furthermore, all of these pieces are worth about 2 Shogi pawns. And that turn tempo difference affects how much these are all worth as well, and affects these. Because a knight in hand is worth a lot more than normal, for example. And being able to deploy them anywhere makes the bishop and rook much more similar. So the argument would be, in hand, you would prefer this piece, then this piece, then this piece, in that order. And then the knight is being the strongest of those, and then the queen being stronger than that. And then these two, and again, these are very similar in strength. So all of these you can effectively say they're equal. All 4 of these on the Shogi side and 6 of these on the chess side, and the queen is better. And then these are potential down trades. Now, the reason I point all of that out is it makes it impossibly hard compared to if you're used to balancing normal chess variants, and then you try to do something with a drop game, such as a Crazy House-like or a Shogi-like, you're quickly going to learn that the position matters more than the material. And you see this all the time in just normal Shogi endgames, because the winning player will typically have almost nothing left because they used all of their material and spent it checkmating the king. And the losing player just goes, oh, I have 20 pieces in hand, but I don't have time to deploy any of them, so they don't really count yet, but I still have more pieces on the board, and my king's dead. Right? That's super common in Shogi. Also, if you fail the checkmate, suddenly your opponent has a ton of material for the counterattack, so make sure you read the mate right. Lily Lionmane is an exceptionally strong youth Shogi player. She made a suggestion based off of this, that instead of further compensating them, Shogi, with more material if they are weak, because the next step would be to potentially give them up to 1 each of another lance, another knight, another silver general, or another gold general in hand. And then you keep adding those to the current reinforcements until it's balanced. That would be the default way that we would handle this, and how we've done it in the past, and how we do it for most of the armies. It's like, okay, you get a reinforcement. Usually it's only back rank that you're able to deploy them, so only here. rather than Shogi, which we allowed all 3 of these. We would just keep giving them material until it was fair. And we would fine-tune that material. For example, Shang-Chi, we gave them a rook and then kept reducing that rook's range down to between 2 and 4, depending on how testing goes, or has gone. Speaking of which, this change means Twin Suns is now in Alpha again. And they got a buff. So, the suggestion to give them extra turns of tempo at the start, and potentially only allowing those moves within the camp. So you wouldn't be able to, for example, do this or this, because that leaves the camp. But you would potentially, at the start of the game, before white even gets a turn, be able to do something like this, this, and this, in order to set up a run this way. Or similarly, this, and I don't know, this. And those n number turns would be their quote-unquote material compensation, because drop games care so much about turns of tempo. And Shogi, as a base game, you have more time due to the fact that the opponent only has a single bishop and a single rook to attack with, compared to this nonsense over here. So you have time to run your king into the corner and try to do like Onaguma shit. Onaguma means badger in the hole, and it's a famous hard-to-crack fortress. The secret's to attack it from the side, but I digress. I'm not sure about that idea. It needs testing. Now to the website. I got very stalled due to lack of online resources and a depression spell and motivation in implementing asynchronous JavaScript, whatever AX stands for, AJAX, on the website, which is why I haven't been streaming my programming of altchess.com. For that, I apologize. I am still not done, but I am making somewhat steady progress. It's measured in inches per day, not miles, but I am satisfied with how it's going. That should be it, everybody. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Let me know what you think about Lily's Shogi idea in the Discord. If you're not part of the Discord, you can join it down below. This is where we talk about incredibly nerdy shit like chess versus Shogi. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.